Okay, so today I'd love to talk with you about the third key of soul embodiment. And yeah, we've been already talking about love, about vitality or life force, and today I would like to make the topic consciousness. And I'm just going to open the conversation like this without a specific question, and just would like to hear you. What comes?
Well, in a way, it's the most complex one of them all. Yet, also in the tangibility side, it's the easiest to have clarity of the existence of it. Because we are conscious about, like, if we're conscious about consciousness, we are conscious, first of all. And to be conscious about love or about life force, we first need to be conscious. Otherwise, we could not have any recognition for their existence. So in that aspect, it's the most fundamental in the tangibility or of experience or of what's in experience. But to explain it, it goes to the highest complexity, because consciousness itself enables every possibility that can be cognized within itself, within its field. There are, perhaps to say, I think the progress in the quantum physics perspective, what this sophistication of math have enabled, can very much support having more ways or tools for consciousness to perceive itself more clearly. And our language is extremely limited and conditioned with how it's perceived. I notice I'm using the word it, like consciousness as it is perceived, and just that is already, it's not so accurate as it could be, but language limits there. How can we distinguish between an object which we can say it to, or like something, a subject, like a singularity of some type, which we can say it to a phenomena, a process which is not exactly somewhere or something or someone, not exactly one. It's a continuum that is not fully defined with the beginning or the end, or where it's it and then where it's what is not it starts and or end. Like, how can you distinguish exactly one ray of the sun, or one wave in the ocean, or one breeze of the wind? It's not fully defined, it's wave. And that's where the quantum perception is relevant, because in a way, consciousness is it, but not only. It's one way of consciousness to recognize itself, to be cognized, and then recognized. Um, if to focus on it as a thing, then I would describe consciousness as an 8-dimensional crystal. 8, yeah. And that kind of shows also the degree of the how complex it is to perceive in its fullness. I think literally it scratches the limit of our imagination, or if more accurately to say, the limit of our imagination expands to the edges of this 8-dimensional crystal when consciousness is on the process of cognizing itself through certain singularity. Yeah.
I see this conversation today is going to be more abstract. But still, like to summarize what I understood so far, is that consciousness is not just a single object, like it's not this thing, and like to define it, you cannot just say like, okay, this is it and this is it not. It's more like a process or like a continuum from what I understood from you. It's like evolving.
It's both. It's both. That's it. Okay. It's so same in the objective equivalent, like an electron is both a particle and a wave, or photon. We are also calculating it as both a particle and a wave, or any quant. And that's the idea that it's both this or this, but also it's both at the same time in a different way. That is more, maybe to say, in a superposition to each other, or there is that famous experiment that I think many heard because so many talk about it, the double slit experiment, with the Copenhagen interpretation of it, that consciousness somehow, the fact there is an observer effect on if electron behaves like a wave or a particle, and then showing that it can also occur in the past or in the future if the checking is kind of in a different type of process. So I think it's naturally anyway leads to that conclusion that explains most elegantly all this weirdness, but also very much relates to what a lot of ancient traditions have said, which, or like in the words of Buddha, for example, that all is mind. It's like the mind is the fundamental substance which everything is made of, or consciousness or awareness, or however we would call it. There is a refinement of distinguishment of what's the difference between consciousness and mind and awareness and soul and psyche and intelligence, like what more specifically the difference is, rather than kind of get it all as same idea. That helps to go into that complexity. And yes, it is abstract, but that's the nature of consciousness. Yeah.
So without going maybe too much into detail, but could you explain like the differences of what you just like laid out, like awareness and consciousness and mind and psyche and intelligence, and like what's a common like thread, and maybe how they differ or distinguish? Because it's like it's almost synonymous, but then also different. What I understand.
Yeah, well, I'm not so expert in English etymology. I know in the Hebrew, originally, I mean, now it's a spoken language on a daily basis, but it's first time in history that this is with Hebrew, because originally it is what is called the holy language, which is part of a spiritual practice that explores God or the Creator, same like Sanskrit. It's a language that in its structure is aiming to be in alignment with the cosmic laws through vibration or through other ways. So in Hebrew there are a lot of like, it's easy to go into the etymology and extract the meaning. I can kind of parallel to the English language, like for example, if someone tells you be mindful about something or be careful about something, what's the difference? Is it same, or is mind and care different? But also when we use care or careful, is it related to that same etymological root, care or mindful and mind? And mind as mental or men, I know they are all the same root. So like from manas, like in Sanskrit. So and what's the difference between manas and the buddhi? You know, like, so it's in English it became so far from the original that it's not fully, like, we need to agree on a meaning in order to continue. It's not that the meaning is already fixed and defined, and it's kind of not clearly distinguished in normal culture, and yet psyche is what psychologist is dealing with. It's yet coming, or a psychiatrist, but it's about the inner experience of a person. But then what's the difference between psychology and subjective experience? So there is with psychology there is also the objective approach, but then there is the mind, which is somewhat refers as that part that is the ultimate observer, that can even observe its own psyche, and it's actually, even if people with a philosophy that is ideal, that believes in materialism, still this is a logical fallacy to have a mind, and many use that as like objective observer, same like in the double slit, as if the consciousness of the observer does not influence the experiment. It's like even perception and consciousness and consciousness and cognition is the same root. But these are all in the same room of experiment. It's not isolated. So mind is some type of an attempt to isolate, like a soul little bit, but without a spiritual context. That because a soul is part of the divinity in a way, and the mind is just more objective in that perspective. Consciousness is from the function of cognition, and this is more physiological approach. It's like cognitive functions in the brain, which we then experience from that subjectivity. But again, the language, it's like I believe and intelligence is about the ability of complexity of information processing. And then we can also add information, what's the ratio between information and consciousness, or awareness, what's the difference between awareness and consciousness. Awareness is in a way subtler than consciousness. If I recognize, it means first I cognized, and then I cognized again, so it's recognized. Like if I just go to the etymological meaning. And consciousness is just that phenomena of cognizing that, and it can be looked as an entity or as a thing that is consciousness, like that I am a consciousness, you are a consciousness. Sometimes there is that perspective rather than a phenomena. Same with awareness. I am an awareness, you are an awareness, or awareness is the phenomena that is happening, yet awareness is where and then also the word attention comes to mind. It's quite messy, and I think instead of going and defining all the words, more effective is just to understand the process, and then we can give it also other names. It's not about the names in themselves, because the names is just a product of where now is the talking. I'm sure if I go to classic English literature, there are more words in that large category or field that I have not mentioned, and it can be more refined. And then again, if to go all the way to Sanskrit, I would guess the origin of the distinguishment of the English word's meaning is kind of where more clarity comes to mind or to consciousness.
So I feel like language is actually on the one hand side necessary to describe and to communicate, like between like what we're doing right now. It's like to transport information between like different consciousness beings, humans, but at the same time it's very limiting, language, and also this like clarity on like the definition of the words and what is the actual meaning of it. So you said what's more relevant is maybe to describe the process. When you were just talking, like you said, the language has limitations, so instead of like going to all the different meanings of the words, to more describe the process. That's what I understood.
The process, the mechanism, the structure of all of it.
Yes.
For the mind to have clarity. I mean, consciousnesses. I think for the mind, it's more objective. It makes it more potentially precise. So there is input of data, there is output when we have will, and also unconscious output, like, oh, why did I move my hand, or why did I do this? Oh, I was not conscious or aware, or mindful, or careful sometimes for nuances. And if to focus on the processing between the input and output, So there is memory, and then maybe this is enough, like a algorithm, like a software, just like there is data coming in, a certain function processing the information, and then there is an output. Maybe this is enough. It's a legitimate view. Like what else is there that is missing? And the function can be dependent on memory. So it kind of gradually grows or shapes itself. We can see it also with the AI now, that it's specialized in specific functions according to experience. And we can look at the experience of consciousness is just experiencing the AI of planet Earth happening through the organism in it. And some of the organisms, such as humans, have such a degree of complexity of function that within that process they have a subspace of cognition that reflects on itself and is constantly focusing on defining an identity for itself. Like, we can just simplify it in this way. So that's one option. What do you feel about that?
I see my mind like trying to grasp and follow, and it's abstract for me. It's like it's something that is not like what we've talked the last time. It's like very tangible, like with practical physical examples. It's more like it takes effort, mental effort for me to go into the imagination and visualization of what you are describing. So I wonder also maybe like there is this mental understanding of what consciousness is, but I imagine that there's also like an experience or like other layers of experiencing or understanding than just with the mind. No?
Like what?
Like what? Like through the body, for example. But then it is again through the mind. Like that's a bit where I'm
You mean when you create a software on the computer and then it have then some information, so that information exists for that entity, which is the computer, without the mind. Like this, what you mean? Like there is information which we are not at all conscious of and not in our experience, so it's without the mind. Like this, what you mean?
I honestly don't even really know what I mean, because I find it very difficult for me to have a image or something or something that I can visualize or tangibly understand what we're talking about, because it feels very abstract. So maybe it would be helpful for me also to, or in general for people to define it more, or to maybe create even I like the image that you were just, or this metaphor that you just described with the software and the hardware, and maybe there's a metaphor or something for understanding consciousness.
I was talking about only software. But yeah, we can look at the brain as a hardware, or the whole body, or everything. but then you say it's too abstract, so let's focus on the definition, which is again focus on the abstract. So I would suggest maybe you just share from your experience, so it can then it will be more tangible. Like if you share an experience, like for example, what would you define an experience or some experience or understanding without a mind? Like just give me examples so I can not go too abstract.
Maybe there's no experience without mind. I think we're getting lost a bit right now. Like maybe also to cut out some part of this conversation. I feel like I'm getting a little bit lost right now in the conversation. I'm not completely following the track.
Doesn't have to be cut out. And I would just invite you to just share an experience that you might suspect that it would be without mind, because I would suggest mind exists in every experience and every understanding. For example, it's a suggestion of perception. Like you ask, what about other, if it's not, but can it be not? Like or just give me something that you have as an experience that is not fitting into that possibility that there is mind. And also mind as it's the observer in a way. It's the observer of thoughts, the observer of which, I mean, that's by definition then understanding. We understand with our thought. Experience, there is sensory input of some type, so every sensory input is in the cognition interpreted in like same as thoughts, it's from mechanical pressure on the finger, it goes to the nerve system and becoming a cognitive process, which like a thought. So where mind would not be like this, for example, I'm just, because you had that idea, where did it come from? Just bring it up.
I think I was thinking about mind as this constant awareness, like what you were describing as the observer, or as like this witness, where I'm constantly like in this process where I can witness my own thinking, my own experience, my own, like what you said, sensory input. Sometimes there are moments where I experience that I'm so immersed in an experience that the observer somehow like is not accessible, or is not like, it's like being so completely in an experience that it's not this constant, like what I experience usually is like this constant, like, okay, I'm observing, like I can go in and out of the experience of observing, of witnessing, you know, like I can have this sometimes even double, like that I'm at the same time in the experience and then also realizing I'm in this experience like very deeply. But sometimes I feel like, especially when it's like very like experiences of big intensity or like rupture or something, like where I feel like there's no mind anymore. Sometimes when I like take psychedelics or something, you know, when I'm so deep in the experience itself, I feel like I am the experience. Like there's no thing that shines the light on it. And maybe this is just my personal like experience. But this is what I meant with like moments of no mind.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, it's good you bring experiences, and of course, you can look at it as personal experience, but we are not unique in our experiences. Like, there are so many people, and pe- many people experience eventually quite same type of states of awareness or of mind, or so. When you're more in an ecstatic state, so there can be few options. One is that you're not aware of anything, and then you also don't have memory of the experience. I guess you don't mean that. So this is one way to say no mind, but it's to say. Is it actually? That's something else, because then there is also that how conscious is the mind, how much awareness, where is it focused. Then there is to be in the flow state, in the so much immersed in doing something, so I'm very aware of that something that I'm doing, and people talk near me, but I didn't notice that people talk near me because I'm so much focused in what I do, and the only reason I know people talk near me is because after that someone told me they talked near me, for example, because I was so focused. So I was not fully aware of the surrounding, consciously at least. Maybe unconsciously I was aware, but then at least I was aware in that moment for what I was doing. So there was consciousness there, and who is the like, if there is no mind, so what is it then that is perceiving? I'm open for different suggestions. Yeah, it's we are creating the meaning of the words; they are not fixed. But if it is the ultimate observer, then why wouldn't it be there as well? That what I would challenge maybe and question. I guess you meant that type of experience.
I guess so.
Maybe there was another experience you described that is a bit different, or
I think it was most about this, what you just described as flow states, when we're so like in to something, you feel really like doing something, or well, like having sex, or like where it's like so much like presence that there's, for me, this the gap between like the experiencer and the experience is like very, very little.
the experience of the
The
second?
experiencer, so the one who's like experiencing it, or like witnessing, observing, seeing, or and then also the experience itself.
The yeah, it's the experience of the experiencer is small, and the experience itself. What about the experience itself?
So what I'm meaning is like the gap between like the actual experience and the one who's witnessing or seeing or observing the experience is very small in these flow states. That's what I experience.
So you coming in a way from, okay, so there is a gap between the experiencer and what is experienced. Like this is
That's my thought process.
that's how this is your thought process. That's how you interpret it. Okay. And rather than the experience, so I would suggest maybe the experience is what is experienced, whatever it is, rather than focusing on defining a separated experiencer for the experience. What do you think about that?
I get what you're saying, yes. And I Mm. So what you're saying is basically the experience is just what's happening, and then the observer, witness, experiencer, however you want to call it, then this is the consciousness?
Mm, depends if you define the experiencer or not. That's the thing. If you define it, it's not the consciousness. If you're not defining it, and I mean not defining, not from a place that keeps it in definition but unconsciously, but what is undefinable in essence, it's like that also, that metaphor that can work very well, like the eye cannot see itself directly. It can see only its reflection, that's the nearest, or a photo of it. And same, the mind cannot know, or consciousness and knowing is also same root. So the consciousness cannot know itself directly, or awareness is not aware of itself directly. It's through a certain effect, through a ripple in the phenomenal existence. And okay.
So it actually requires the experience to see itself. So it requires, like, the image that I just got was like the experience as the mirror, or the reflection where consciousness can experience itself.
Okay. I think it's a direction, but that I say okay because now it comes to something that can describe it more tangibly to imagination, with geometry. Mirror is in a way a two-dimensional something, like a flat space that reflects back, and we see a three-dimensional movement there, motion, or a reflection of it. I would suggest that what we experience, everything we experience, also what is considered to be inner experience, like dreams or thoughts or like imagination, everything we experience is it's a reflection through one of the faces of the eight-dimensional crystal back to, but the face is not necessarily two-dimensional, it's four-dimensional. It's like, because it's eight-dimensional crystal, so it have these like it's having certain number of seven-dimensional parts that have number of six, that have number of five, all the way to corners of zero-dimensional. And as the experience deepens, the ability to cognize more complexity, maybe to say even the intelligence of experience deepens, then the mirror is more dimensional, what it reflects. Yet the mind in itself is always more dimensional than that, and then therefore I would conclude, if assuming that consciousness or mind is a dimensional crystal, the experience can be up to 7-dimensional imagination, like an experience we can imagine. Every experience we can imagine, like just every experience we can imagine is within 7-dimensionality. That would be a suggestion, or a logical conclusion. It's within 7-dimensionality of, or in a way, different rotations and of the 8-dimensional crystal, with not always like it's prisming, maybe to say the light of awareness through in different ways, and maybe some parts are also shadowed and so on. But basically, yeah, every experience is a mirror of an aspect of the self, an aspect of the absolute self, of the ultimate self that we are and are not conscious of. So every experience, and also a process of understanding, is some type of an experience. Like, even if I understand something in math, this is an experience. That's how I would look at it. I know there are some people that say thinking is not experience, and often I would even find in the New Age spirituality that mind is demonized as the problem and as something to get rid of. Mm-hmm. I would challenge that with the pre-trans fallacy that I find quite prevalent, which is the confusion, pre-trans fallacy regarding rationality. So would be to behave pre-rational will contradict rational quite often, and also to behave trans-rationally might be seen as unreasonable, but the pre-rational way would say, yeah, it's unreasonable because it's beyond, it's like, but actually it is not integrating into it all the reasonings, and in that field of rationale can logically meet them, but it just cancels the mind, and kind of then it needs to demonize to have that emotional addition to that, to repress the mind. So it's a process of dumbization, like active reduction of intelligence, of cognitive intelligence. But it's it's common, that meme of saying, like, yeah, to be without mind, but who then is without the mind? And maybe it's not mind, then we can go into the definition. Maybe there is a difference. Yet I lean on the interpretation of Buddha, for example, of that all is mind. For example, I don't see essential distinguishment in essence between mind and soul, or ego in the original Freudian meaning, or self in the Jungian, like first person perspective, where it's sourced from, like the source of the subjective, which is, if to again go into particles view rather than waves, but also in waves it would be the same. It just particles is more tangible for imagination because it's simpler. So every subject is like a particle, and then subjective perception springs from within it. Yet objective perception is a constellation of subjects that create it, and as more subjects, the more objective it would be, both numerically, like as more like, but also some subject would have more radically different perspectives, and integrating that, synthesizing from it more objective perception. So there is never the absolute objective perception. It's ongoing process, rather than the absolute subjective, which is the source of everything. It's like the mind of the creator, or of all. So that's the mind, the Buddha mind, in that sense.
Okay. I can't summarize it right now because I feel like it is really still beyond, like many of the things that you're talking about is still beyond my own capacity of perception and my own, like, yeah, just it's really, it's going deep in my brain and like starting to make like new little connections and new little like associations, but it's not something that I have ever like in this precision like analyzed or went inside. So maybe it's good to like you've been talking about, for example, like all is mind, and like to just understand what you're saying. If like when you say all is mind, like this will be my next thread, because this is where I somehow lost lost the thread of the conversation when you said all is mind. And
Yeah. Again, if to put it in proportions, so we are used to imagine in three-dimensionality our reality. The more creative among us go beyond these limits more often, and perhaps even not in one-dimensionality more, but even more perhaps. But to represent it on the tangible aspect, the concrete more. So an example would be space itself, where all matter exists in. So we see three-dimensional objects. They exist in space. Is space three-dimensional? Well, for sure, at least three-dimensional. Now, when we expand our imagination more easily, and perhaps even the default way of imagination, to perceive four-dimensionally, when we just train that degree of complexity to become capable of more dimensionality. It's like a whole vantage point of complexity. So this is, I would say, exactly Maxwell, the physicist, was, I would say, the most classic example of a person that was trying to figure the magnetism and electricity and like what it is, and it's doing experiment, and it see the magnet is moving something, or electricity moving like something magnetic, and it's like, but he don't see anything, and like he broke in a way his mind for many years until it cracked enough, and he just like realized there are electromagnetic fields. These have four-dimensional freedom of motion. And that was a revolution. It's like a classic example for someone who expand his imagination for that. Now, it's not the only one. It's just very classic pathway, very concrete, very tangible, very focusing on object. And focus and practice enables. And also for him, it's classic because for him it was very difficult because there was no social affirmation to what he did. He was like a pioneer in his society in that sense. When there is more affirmations, it's much easier. It can go way faster. It does not need to take a couple of decades. And electromagnetic fields still exist in space. So space, in a way, if it contains four-dimensional fields, then it is at least four-dimensional. So then we can understand there is the magnetosphere of Earth, and then of the Sun, and the galaxy, in a way, also is actually even something more than that, like Einstein took it. Einstein stretched mind to the next vantage point, in a way, seeing that space itself can bend into black hole, for example, spiral into one point with infinite gravity, yet it's relative and not infinite inside. It's infinitesimally small, and it's relative in effect. It's not sucking all existence into it. It's just what's within the range of the galaxy spiraling towards it. But for that, the concept of space also evolves. So if space is just a three-dimensional infinite volume, which everything is in it, then space become a field that contains fields. It's like, so things have field in it, and the 3D is subpart of 4D always. I mean, and space itself, for explaining the black hole, it's in a way the general theory of relativity shows that it's in a way, to show that movement we need actually 5 dimensions in perception. Or so it's not exactly space, it's space-time that is bending. So the fact it can bend, it bends in something, in 5-dimensionality, and it's called space-time because the default thinking was to say, oh, the time is 4th dimension. But we can expand the perception of time and space from the Kantian view, which is 1 time, 3 space, and that's the basis of all. Einstein expanded beyond that. To show it can bend, it can collapse into singularity, multiple singularities, it's adding another dimension or hinting on another dimension, because there is time in space, but there is also time beyond, because there is something that's happening that in it time even bends. So there is also something beyond. And possible to say that space itself then is 5-dimensional. Space in a larger sense, space-time or time-space, even if to put time as a more dominant expression of the dimensionality rather than space. For imagining that, for imagining the black hole, it's more abstract than imagining electromagnetic fields. It takes higher degree of complexity of imagination. So it's more difficult. Now, add another dimension to that, like sixth dimensionality, like the vibration of light itself that exists beyond the universe, beyond time and space, yet through cracks of gravity shines in, and also how to say the word, not every crack of gravity, it's a selective in what shines into at least our human experience, a narrow spectrum of visual ability to perceive. So it's even more abstract, that infinite light. Yet a lot of esoteric traditions do talk about these three levels of the ether, or like that's in the more Western theological traditions and so on, or in the Kabbalah also, like the light of God. And so there are scientists that have explored consciousness for thousands of years. We don't need technology for that. We need subjective experience and deepening the mirror that reflects back, using logic to understand the mechanism. And then seven dimensionality, it's even more abstract, more difficult to perceive. So perceiving the eight-dimensional crystal in itself is, I would suggest, this is like a aim that a consciousness always strives to and never will achieve, and that's also what defines the limits of consciousness. Also in every point, and also in the larger, in the eighth thing, there is no really, like, between the big and the small. It's not like the singularity starts to lose its meaning there. The zero loses its grip of being the singularity, the subject. Like it's so it's not like language is far from it, and also for the contemplation to imagine it takes practice. But if I go back to four-dimensionality of electromagnetic fields, or five-dimensionality of space-time, like general space-time, then that's the direction, I would say. It's like it's not like, okay, I try to be as accurate as I can, because I know the logic is in essence enables the full description of it, but the language is like a cognitive technology that evolves with time. The more we will communicate, the more we will have culture that talks about these things, the more we will be able to precise the function of mind on reality. Like the objective meanings will be possible to go deeper in accuracy and distinguishing different essences beyond 3D perception. So far the language is very much designed for up to third person perspective. It's parallel in that sense. Fourth person perspective, we can see that possibility more easily. Yet, with the Jungian suggestion of what is the self, and that every persona is a constellation of archetypes which is holographically presenting itself, and there is no such thing as individual, really, like that one that is undividable individual. No, it's all made of parts. So gradually. I'm just, you ask, so I'm showing the direction, yet it's understandable that it's not fully perceived. It's no expectation for that. Yet the questions help clarify what is relevant for you and for more, and possibly for me also. And so this is my invitation and also reply to you saying that you don't understand. And,
Okay. So I feel it's very necessary to talk more about these topics, because just as you said, like, it's just not something that is talked about, or that is even topic in conversations. At the same time, it feels very essential for us humans and our like experience of life and of ourselves. And yeah, I see the necessity of bringing more conversations and more clarity in it, and also expanding more like the what you were talking about, imagination, or like these different dimensions that you were talking about, like how like I can barely imagine 4, like 5 dimension, like, and then even talking about 6 and 7, it's very hard for me, because like my mind got very conditioned in 3D, like 3D, and then maybe adding time to it. But yeah, I feel through conversations it actually gives possibility, and also through like sharing knowledge in this way, it gives possibility to expand these ways of perception and of imagination. And just as you were describing, like this mirror of these different, like how with, like, at least that's what I understood, like how with every dimension it becomes more like facets of the diamond, or like more ways how to recognize itself, like that, through also gaining more understanding, more more expansion of understanding in how these dimensions work, and how, like, what you're talking about exactly, like how this actually enriches and deepens the experience of consciousness, of itself.
there are two different things that come to say. First is, there is the deepening of like I can have a reflection of a face of the diamond, like a two-dimensional face, or I can have a reflection of tetrahedra, like a whole three-dimensional piece, a reflection of that type, which is much more complex because it prisms differently the light through it. This is a way to deepen. Also, to have a very different perspective, like another different face. Now, how do I connect them that supports deepening? The thing is, with that, it's very potent in one way and very destructive in another way to do something like that, to offer a very different perspective. Because there is the habit of consciousnesses, of minds through consciousnesses, to recognize themselves as that specific face. I am this, like the definition of self is very narrow. And when suddenly someone receives a whole other mirror, there is either the instinct to push it to the shadow, and then there is a lot of effort to keep it repressed. This is a post-trauma response, because that revelation of the other face is experienced as trauma. Another way to come to it is through initiation. Initiation and trauma is essentially exactly the same thing, just different interpretation of it. So rather than trying to repress it, is embracing it. And to, oh, I'm also this, and letting go of what I know as myself and opening to more what is. For initiation, one needs to be ready, and who is to decide if it would be like this or this? It's life eventually. And of course there is element of maturity of the person, because forgiveness is exactly what frees, like from freedom, free someone from having an interpretation as trauma. So if one is mature enough, or as we talked about, the frequency of life, if the amplitude is large enough and can be contained within consciousness in high amplitude, the ability to forgive grows together with the compassion. Forgiveness is the base for the compassion ability. And it's exactly also the base of being more trauma immune and actually using experience to expand the perception on self. And that connects to the other thing that also, this is why I mostly focus with people, like in workshops, for example, I mostly focus on expanding perception to four-dimensionality through experiencing the body as a four-dimensional field of life force. Because as more clear that would be, the more effective would be the perception of higher dimensionalities and less bypassing and like shadowed by aspects. It's, if you build the 5th floor of a building, it's good that the 4th floor is built well first. So I would, in relevancy for this, I would focus the expansion of perception into four-dimensionality, into figuring life force in actuality, tangibly, like evolving the imagination to... Anyway, everything we perceive, we perceive through the senses, but we imagine reality. It's always imagination. Everything is imagination. We tell ourselves this is reality and not imagination, but it is also part of the imagination, that voice that tells it. Because it's all in perception. And if we can imagine easily four-dimensional motion, then we more easily can experience our daily reality four-dimensionally, and first of all ourself. Like this enables much more functions also of how to take care of this body. It opens many possibilities for healing, for example, or for ecstasy in a sexual connection, like much more easily, or not just sexual, but in the influence of nature becomes more tangible. And from there, love, for example, which we talked about as well, how we perceive the pure unconditional love is very much parallel in its mechanism to a clear five-dimensional motion. And that expand into something beyond. So it's anyway, I find most relevancy to focus on clarifying the life force. Yet, for the mind, and also where I find much more excitement, is the fire want to go up to more, and it's fascinating and interesting, and yet it's always good to focus on the foundation first.
Okay, we are reaching our time limit for today. Is there anything that you'd like to share to summarize, or any last thoughts? I feel like it's a very broad topic where we can go into many details, and just like touching a little bit today, like just opening it a bit. But maybe there's anything that you'd like to say or share about the topic of consciousness before we end. No? Oh, okay. Okay, then we'll leave it here for today. Okay.
Maybe, if there is a if there is a possibility to reply on a chat or something, so you're welcome to ask questions about it, and I can expand on what viewers ask.
Okay, so you're talking now to the people who watch this video, right? Yeah, good. To ask questions and deepen the streams of curiosity. Okay, good.
Okay.